Good morning, everyone. I'm super nervous, as you can tell. Yeah, thank you for that introduction, Laura-Lee, and also that description of today's topic just really resonated with me. I'm not sure about you guys, but yeah, so thank you, everybody, for being here. By the way, this was kind of prepared last minute. I had about 3 weeks, but I was very passionate about the topic. And during those 3 weeks, I also had COVID for a week, but here I am, so bear with me. So did you guys know that May is actually Mental Health Awareness Month? If you didn't, now you do. And what better time to speak about this month's topic, which is acceptance. And also what a great opportunity for me to share my story with you about accepting my ADHD diagnosis. Now, I have a question for you, a couple of questions, and only share if you feel comfortable. How many of you know someone with ADHD? Thank you. Oh, wow, almost everyone. Thank you. Thank you. How many of you think that, or who thinks that they may have ADHD? Okay. Okay. And how many of you, who has been diagnosed with ADHD and knows it for sure? Thank you so much for raising your hand and sharing that with us. I appreciate that very much, because I know that can be tough. So next slide, please. So what is ADHD? And I'm going to only just give you a couple of tidbits here, but attention, it stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I believe that, and I've also read this in many places, that deficit can be a bit misleading because it's more about regulating the attention than deficit, because of those of us who have ADHD, we know we can freaking hyperfocus really well. So yeah, there's 3 types: hyperactive, inattentive, and combined. Although I personally had suspected it for a few years, I actually wasn't officially diagnosed till about 1.5 years ago. And by the way, I'm not a medical professional, so what I'm going to be telling you today, I do suggest also do your own research and see a medical professional if you may feel like you need a diagnosis. I will also share a couple of resources with you at the end, books or podcasts, things that have helped me on my journey. It's not complete, obviously, and I had to kind of put it together quickly, but if you have any more questions, call me, email me, talk to me later. I have cards right here. You're welcome to do that, and I'm happy to give you like a 1-hour free discovery call. All right, so let's see. Next slide, please. To give you a little bit of a background about me, I know Laura-Lee already mentioned a few things, that I was born and raised in Germany in a very, very small village of less than 700 people in rural Germany. And I never really felt like I fit in, and I wanted to go and see and explore the world. I moved a few times in Germany and then lived in the UK for 3 years before moving to Phoenix in 2008. I have somewhat of an eclectic resume because I have had various different jobs, and even like the master's degree in architecture from Germany, but I never really had a career as such until I found, or until I explored my passion for photography, which was about 11 years ago. Next slide, please. So I wanted to show you just a couple of examples of my work. So I do mainly editorial and commercial portrait work, but also dog photography, as you can see. I know, usually it's always the case, yeah, yeah. And then next slide, please. So yeah, a few covers. I mean, I've probably had and I always feel bad, you know, not bad, but weird admitting this, but yeah, I've probably had about 1,000 pictures published by now. So I am proud of that for sure. Next slide. I've had some fashion shoots. And one more slide. Yeah, this is a project I'm very proud of. I was able to do this actually during the height of COVID in 2020, summer of 2020. The city of Phoenix commissioned me to do this project called Phoenix Her Stories, and it was basically celebrating 100 years of women's voting rights. And I had the chance to photograph wonderful women, 31 women in the Phoenix community who've had a great impact on the community. You can see Katie Hobbs, Cindy Dash from Changing Hands, like several council women. It was just an amazing, amazing project that I'm very proud of. So when you see these pictures, you may think, oh yeah, she's totally got her shit together, right? She's like, she knows what she's doing. She's, you know, and I am proud of my work. I really am. but it doesn't show the internal struggles that I've had throughout my entire life and while I was doing any of these projects. But that's just the thing about mental health, isn't it? Or the lack thereof. It's invisible. So let's go. Yeah. Oh, by the way, it's missing a word. It's supposed to say looking for answers. So what are we looking for? So how did ADHD actually come up? So this is going to be a little bit of a longer story. But basically what happened about 6 years ago, that's one of the things that happened. My nearly 30 years of marriage fell apart. It was unexpected, but despite all of the heartache, in the long run, it was one of the best things that could have happened to me. I was actually forced to concentrate on my mental health, did a lot of therapy, and overall, a lot of self-help work. About 2 years ago, I found myself in a situation where several things came together, which made me search for even more answers. The first story is that I was in the kitchen cooking with my boyfriend, and he was trying to tell me a story while I was trying to concentrate on a recipe. As I had done so many times in the past, I found my mind drifting off and actually not being able to listen to him because I was concentrating on my freaking recipe. So what happened? As so many times before, I pretended to listen. Trust me, this is something I'm not proud of having to admit. It's a masking technique, which is a term that I now am familiar with, a type of coping mechanism that I've used so many times to not be found out. To not have to admit that sometimes I have a hard time listening or concentrating too long, especially if I'm hyper-focusing on something else, or if I'm transitioning from one thing to the next. Needless to say, my now ex-boyfriend, by the way, not because of that. He called me out, and ultimately, I'm glad he did, because we had a healthy conversation about it. And I explained to him that that was something I've struggled with all my life, that it wasn't personal, and that I wasn't proud of it. And I made basically a vow to myself that I was going to investigate this further. The other thing that happened was that my son during that time also had been talking a lot about me about that, the fact that I probably have ADHD too, because he himself had been diagnosed in his mid-20s. And that was also an explanation to a lot of things that happened in his life. So yeah, he told me that he could see some of the symptoms, but also that ADHD is hereditary. Last but not least, the other thing that happened around the same time was that I was thinking about signing up for a photography class. It would have cost me around $1,500 at the time, so not a small sum. By the way, on a side note, this wouldn't have been the first time that I signed up and spent a lot of money on a class and not use it effectively. Actually, during COVID, I even did like a one-on-one workshop with a pet photographer to set up my pet photography business. What happened with that one? I just couldn't get myself to implement the changes she recommended into my business. I felt like a loser because I wasn't able to use the workshop effectively, and I felt like I had wasted my money and that it was my fault. So with all of these things coming together around the same time, I took a very close look at this. And I asked myself, why would I invest the time, the money and energy in yet another photography class? By the way, it's not that every photography class I've ever taken didn't have any positive effect, but it seemed like the business aspect was always difficult for me. But yeah, why would I be spending the money, energy, and time in that if ultimately this behavior and these outcomes kept on repeating themselves, like over and over again throughout my life? It was like living the movie Groundhog Day. I needed to find the root cause. So I decided to investigate the possibility of having ADHD to see if this could be the root cause for so many of my challenges and why these standard cookie cutter solutions just didn't work for me. I started researching the topic ADHD, and trust me, research is something I'm very good at. I can go down the rabbit hole very easily. Next slide, please. So I found this Facebook group called ADHD for Smartass Women. Great title, right? I remember the first night I laid in my bed and I was reading through posts and comments. I was literally laughing out loud and also crying and bawling my tears out because I totally saw myself in these women. For the first time, I felt understood. I could relate. It was such a relief. So instead of the photography class, I ended up signing up for a class with the lady, Tracy Otsuka, to be introduced and to learn more about myself, right, and ADHD. And while I was in this class, I was introduced to ADHD coaching. That really sparked my interest. Next slide, please. So that led me to ADGA. It stands for ADD Coach Academy, and it's the global leader in ADHD and life coach training, as well as ADHD education in general. Although I was intrigued by the possibility of becoming a coach, I initially decided to only sign up for the first 2 modules, which were simply ADHD and personal transformation. So educating myself and learning how to help myself. Once I started the process, though, the program, and connected with the other students and instructor, so much made even more sense. We really went into depth. And oh my God, like never before in my life had I felt so seen and heard and understood. This was a safe place, sharing our challenges without judgment, and finally having the vocabulary to express so many of our similar struggles. I used to not have the words to explain how I felt. I just knew I was different, and by different, meaning not good enough. Next slide, please. Yeah, I used to think it was just me, being too weird, being too emotional, feeling too deeply, not working hard enough, not trying hard enough. I finally learned that it wasn't my lack of willpower or effort that was to blame. It was my brain that was wired differently. Most importantly, I learned that ADHD doesn't have anything to do with intelligence, that there was a biological reason for the way my brain worked. Finally, I felt a sense of peace and a sense of acceptance. Like this huge weight had been lifted off my shoulder by this knowledge and sense of community. It was not just me. I was not a loser. I was not a bad person because my mind drifted off sometimes. I was not a quitter because I didn't stick with every new hobby that I started or finished every book that I started reading. I was not stupid because sometimes I may have read a paragraph 2 or 3 or even 4 times and still not fully grasp what it said because my mind was maybe tired or preoccupied with something else. Now, by the way, that doesn't happen all the time. But you name it, my brain gets preoccupied a lot. But I am a worthy person with a mind that simply functions slightly differently than that of people with neurotypical brains. The thing is, I used to use negative self-talk pretty much all the time. Something I actually rarely ever do anymore. And that's been a huge part of my journey to self-acceptance. So after the first few weeks of experiencing so many aha moments of epic proportions, I just knew I had to take the coaching class as well. I wanted others who may be struggling in silence, like I used to also feel seen, heard, and understood without much of an explanation or justification. That's why I'm here today, sharing my story. So this coaching program was also a financial investment, a big one. And it took 7 months to complete. But in the contrast to the many other classes I took before, this program changed my life to the core. Being able to not just accept myself, but help others as well. So, what are some of the things that I learned about ADHD myself? Let's go to the next slide. Now, here are some common struggles that people with ADHD have. Now, it doesn't mean everybody has these that has ADHD. We're all different, again, within the group of ADHD. There's impulsivity, hard time with working memory, lack of dopamine. That was a big one once I realized that was the case. Time blindness, executive dysfunction, distractibility, rejection sensitivity, dysphoria. Yeah, huge one for me. Let's go to the next slide. So distractibility. Now, again, the upside is we can also hyperfocus. It feels like literally like channels in your brain are constantly changing, but you're not in charge of the remote. And this is, again, my experience, right? Like you have a Ferrari brain with bicycle brakes, racing thoughts, hard time ignoring sometimes noises, like if I get distracted easily, if I talk to somebody and something else is happening, difficulty focus on what's important. And another thing I found out just actually not too long ago is that we're actually motivated by interest, novelty, competition, or sense of urgency. So knowing that has also helped me with many things, but also with distractibility. Next slide, please. So working memory. Yeah, what was I doing? Where am I going? What did I just want to do, right? Forgetfulness, walking into a room, forgetting why you walked in. Forget to do things that you promise that you'll do. You know, that can be disappointing, right? To friends and family, or anybody for that matter. Luckily, I must say, I've always been really good with my clients. They're always priority. Like, I don't think I've ever, disappointed anybody. So you get started on something, get distracted, and never remember to get back to it. Next slide, please. Impulsivity. I used to do this a lot, interrupting people, changing their sentences for them. So rude, right? And I was guilty of that. Because of this coaching class that I've been doing, I now barely ever do it anymore, because even if I do, I try to, bring myself back to, like, if I try to get distracted, because what would happen is that I would think of something to say and I'd be afraid of forgetting it. So then I'd blurt it out. And now, if it's just a regular conversation, I don't have a piece of paper, I just remind myself, this is that person talking, that's what's important. And if I have a piece of paper, I might just make a quick note of it, like in a coaching call session, for example. So yeah, making rash decisions, enthusiastically starting projects, getting frustrated, bored, and then quitting. Yeah, buying stuff that I end up not using, and return window closed, and here I am stuck with it. Next one. That's my son, by the way. And I asked him, and he said I could use his picture. Yeah, low levels of dopamine. That was also huge, understanding that. Because we have less dopamine, and you can look up the scientific aspect of it, but that's just the way it is. ADHD brains, we seek more dopamine because we don't have as much as others. And dopamine is not just responsible for the feelings of pleasure, but it's also responsible for reward and motivation, to get you motivated. Because if you're happy, you're more likely to get motivated to do something, right? It's almost sometimes like trying to push yourself uphill, or a lot of times. We are susceptible to addiction. That can be food, that can be drugs. If it feels good, we tend to do it. Looking for instant gratification. Yeah, and literally sometimes I can't get, getting myself to do something I really hate to do. Next slide. Executive dysfunction. So what does that mean? Executive functioning skills means basically being able to come up with an idea, make a plan, and then executing the plan to get to the result. For me, that's sometimes like cooking, like actually like going to the store, getting everything you need. And if it's like a dish that has like 5 different parts to it, I don't even mess with it. Yeah, see, I see some nodding, people nodding here, because it's like, it's too much. But it's acceptance, right? I either have somebody else do the cooking, or I just do what I can. So trouble organizing is not just that, but it's trouble organizing thoughts, emotions, tasks, schedule, finances, your home. Or it can be. Difficulty prioritizing. We reinvent the wheel a lot. But I think it's also the sense of novelty, right? We're like striving to get motivated. So if it's something new, if we're doing it a new way, then we may be more motivated. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you get to do it. At least that's my opinion. Hard to finish things that I'm not interested. Okay, next slide. Yeah, that was huge. Once I realized that that's the thing, again, finding the words, the vocabulary to describe how I felt all my life. Yeah, the word dysphoria means unbearable. That's a strong word, right? So rejection, sensitivity, dysphoria. And again, not everybody with ADHD has this. And you can also have RSD if you don't have ADHD. But yeah, it's basically an intense emotional response to either a real or even a perceived threat, or not threat, sorry, rejection, right? If I send an email out with pictures to a link for the pictures, I didn't get something back in a couple of days, I'm like, oh my God, they hate the pictures, right? Yeah, I don't do that anymore. At least I try not to. But it's just knowing that this is a thing has helped me deal with it better. It's not cured it, but it's helped me deal with it better. Yeah, and actually, interesting, not a statistic, but it's estimated that kids with ADHD by the age of 10 have heard more than 20,000 negative comments versus kids without ADHD. So yeah. Next slide. Emotional dysregulation. Yeah, it amplifies emotions. And that pretty much sums it up for me. Like there's actually research that there's chemical stuff going on in your brain, right? That this will happen or can happen. So others may say, oh yeah, you're overreacting, right? You're being too emotional. And to me, that also feels, sometimes leads to overwhelm, anxiety, which can lead to anxiety, depression, addiction. Yeah, next slide. Time blindness. For us, there's 2 time zones. It's either the now or not now. Simple, right? We have a difficulty feeling time. And personally, I have an aversion against the word goals. It's just too far out. Like if you ask me like, what's your 5-year goal? I'm like, yeah, don't even. I used to try hard and think about, oh yeah, what am I going to say? But now I'm like, I don't know. See what life brings. And I know that that's not necessarily always helpful with the business, but acceptance. Yeah, so a hard time estimating how long something takes. Like sometimes I would be, okay, I should be leaving now. Wait, but I have 5 minutes. Let me answer this email really quick, right? And then boom, you're late. I mean, I have techniques now to where I usually am not late. I've gotten way better at it. But I mean, I just, again, see people nodding. So yeah, and then what I also tend to do is underestimate the time that something that I like will take, but overestimate the time that something that I don't want to do will take. That's something that I've realized where it's like, okay, wait, because I really want to do something, right? So I'm like, oh yeah, it's not going to take long. But if I don't want to do it, I find all the reasons why I shouldn't. Yeah, procrastination, same thing. Okay, next one. So now I've talked about all the struggles. Let's talk about the positive things, because also coaching is based on positive psychology, by the way. And it's important that it's so important, it's crucial that we accept ourselves with, sure, our maybe shortcomings, but also look at what we can achieve and what we have achieved. We ADHDers often have a very high degree of creativity and imagination. Now, feeling deeply can create just some beautiful art, right? Music, poetry, you name it. So many famous creatives have ADHD. I mean, I can only think of a few now, but Justin Timberlake, Trevor Noah, Adam Levine, Britney Spears, I don't know, Simone Biles. Yeah, so many people. If you look it up, you'll be like, wow. We have innovative, original ideas, right? Outside of the box thinking, yeah, we're really good at that. Because, you can't necessarily plan creativity or imagination, right? It's like stuff comes up, ideas come up. You can't sit down and plan, oh, now I'm going to have an idea. So yeah, apparently great sense of humor. I read this somewhere. Again, Trevor Noah is a great example of that. Connecting things and people. I don't know, that I feel that that's one of my strengths too, is sort of because of, again, my brain's constantly going. I'm like, oh, this person's looking for a house. I just met this real estate agent, things like that, connecting people. Oh, and we can be super passionate and enthusiastic about things or people that we really care about. And also, a fun fact, people with ADHD are 300% more likely to start their own business. For example, Walt Disney, Richard Branson, Bill Gates, Charles Schwab. So don't let it hold you back. Next slide, please. So yeah, some of you may say, well, isn't everybody a little bit ADHD? No. There are, oops, sorry, I need to take some water. I mean, you may have some of these symptoms, right, that I explained earlier, forgetfulness, working memory, but those things may also have other root cause. But the difference with having ADHD is that we struggle chronically, basically. There may be times when you don't have such a hard time, or you don't deal with, when I say struggle, not everybody looks at it as a struggle, by the way, but, or difficulties. Now, you may not have this all the time. Sometimes the symptoms are worse, sometimes they're better, depending on your energy, depending how you feel in general. So many aspects have an impact on that. So everybody's ADHD looks a little different, right? But again, the big thing is that we suffer from it chronically, and that your life is negatively impacted by it. One of most famous ADHD psychiatrists, Dr. Ned Hallowell, he said that one of the most telling signs of having ADHD is unexplained underachievement. So people may have the talent, like, oh, but you're so great at what you do with your photography. Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And they mean well, but it's hard. So yeah. Next slide, please. So I've decided I'm going to be working with my brain, not against it. Next slide. And I want to become more of who I am rather than overcoming who I am. Next slide. So here's some of the things that I do, my personal toolbox, right? Again, this may not work for everybody. The important thing is that you find out what works for you. And that because the thing is, reading these, and I'm not dissing any self-help books, but if it doesn't work for you, then move on. You know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with trying something and figuring out it doesn't work for you. But for me, for example, and I think this is probably something that everybody could benefit from, is the power of pause. Hugely important and effective. And that starts with self-awareness, right? Finding yourself in a moment where like, uh-oh, RSD is coming up, I'm getting super emotional or whatever it might be. Taking a step back, helping with your self-awareness without, not to get stuck or be reactive. Reflecting on what's happening, checking your mind and body, acknowledging what you're feeling. And if you're stuck, maybe reaching out to friends to verbally process. This is also something that I now found out through this program, that I'm a verbal processor. So, and my friend Melissa, who's here, is a good example. I've talked through things with her so many times, and just by talking about it and her listening and maybe throwing in a few questions here and there, helped me come to solutions. So if you know that, make sure you use that. Yeah, and then this power pause is especially helpful with amygdala hijack. I could talk about that all day long. Amygdala hijack is like crazy, but it doesn't only happen with people with ADHD, but like people who have road rage, for example, that's what happens. Your amygdala gets hijacked because you're in a fight or flight mode. And basically what happens is the part of your brain that deals with reasoning and yeah, it's offline. So it's important, like if I feel like I'm sliding into that spot, it's important, again, that power pause, bringing yourself back. Knowing my strengths. I can recommend this to anybody, whether you have ADHD or not. It's so great. It's called via character strength. And basically I found out that love and kindness and beauty, appreciation of beauty and excellence, creativity, that those are some of my top strengths. So if I don't use these, I'm probably not going to be happy. So knowing that is very helpful. Same with values and needs. I've found out through these tests and programs that I've done that connection is one of the biggest, like my most important need. So if I don't feel connected, again, I'm probably not going to be happy. Next slide, please. Hopefully I'm not too long here. Yeah, so us ADHDers, we tend to concentrate on the negative. And we forget about our accomplishments. What have I achieved? What did I do today that was great? Rather than, oh, what did I not do? So in this program, we learned, well, create a rainbow list, however you want to do it, whether it's on a whiteboard, whether it's a little book that you buy, whatever sparkles your brain to help you do this. And write down your accomplishments, something that you can go back to as well. Like some people do gratitude journals. Why not do an accomplishment journal, right? I use Siri, mainly Siri and Alexa, but mainly Siri all the time for reminders. Like if I'm in the middle of something, and again, my mind's racing and thinking about something else that needs to be done, rather than getting up and doing it, like doing the laundry, I'd be like, okay, hey, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to say it. I was going to respond. Remind me in half an hour to take out the laundry. And boom, it's out of my mind, out of that mental whiteboard. And I have, again, more mental bandwidth to put into what I'm doing. Yeah, so it's a brain download. Do not disturb on my phone. I've been using that a lot as well, obviously, especially if I'm in a coaching call. The Pomodoro technique, I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with that. Yeah, I see some nodding. Okay. It helps, right, to kind of limit your time. I've been kind of using it slightly differently where I estimate, like if I have a to-do list for the day, I'll kind of estimate how long it'll take me. And I'll use one box for 30 minutes. And what happens often is that I'd be like, oh, wait a minute, you already got like 8 or 9 or 10 hours or 12 hours worth of work here. There's no way I can get this done, right? So that helps me estimate the time that I may need. The other thing that's important that I've found out is it's not just important to do for time management. It's not important to just to apply time management, but energy management as well. For example, I may have a task on here, like making a phone call that's unpleasant, calling, I don't know, the IRS or whatever. And I'm not going to want to do this, right? So I'm going to push this to whatever last minute. The phone call may only take 10 minutes. Yeah, probably not. But anyway, but I just have a hard time getting myself to do it. So that's a red task for me. I mean, you can even use color coding, right? So what I now do is I look at my day, like what's my most productive or most energetic time of the day? For me, that's usually in the morning, starting maybe 9 o'clock. So what I'll try to do is put that task that's taken me a lot of energy to get myself to do it, I put that task in that time slot. And hopefully I'll do it. FocusMate, has anybody heard of that? FocusMate. So this is a website. It's free for 3 sessions a week, or you can do the paid version. But you can also do it with a friend, body doubling. So what that means is nothing sexual. it means basically being accountable, keeping yourself accountable for what you're doing. So on FocusMate, the way it works is you find somebody, and they're all over the world. So it's interesting. You always find somebody. You pick how many minutes, and you connect with them via video, and then quickly you'll say what you want to work on. And so there's the other person, and you turn off you mute your mic, and you just work for however long, right? So there's also, for us ADHDers, again, what motivates me is also competition, right? A sense of urgency. So that kind of includes that, where I'm now motivated, I'm accountable. Somebody else is working as well. They can even see me, right? But again, you can do this with a friend too. Yeah, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And if all else fails, I play my happy list on Spotify. If I'm, just in general, if I need a happy booster, that's what I do. Next one. Yeah, it takes a village. You were talking about community, sense of community, right? And I was telling you about how connection is so vital for me. So yeah, that's why this is important. You know, initially, obviously, there's self-awareness. There's therapy, for me, also medication, coaching session, which, by the way, I did not want to do at the beginning. I did not, but it's been helpful. Coaching sessions, which for me personally, yeah, that's been also huge, because we as coaches, we believe that our clients are whole, capable, and they have the answers within. It's not about me telling you, as the term coach might imply, that I'm going to tell you what to do. No. I may make a suggestion, but if I do, I'm going to ask permission first. But basically what coaching does over time is, and I've again experienced this firsthand because I've met a lot of coaches now in my program and we coach each other and stuff. So, but what it does is it doesn't just help you with whatever you're working through at that time in that session, but it helps you long-term. You know, when you, over time, it builds your self-confidence. Because if you feel and you know, and you get it tickled out of you that, yeah, there's that answer, I have it within, it's just a matter of how do I get it out? I mean, I know it's done it with me. It's really raised my self-confidence, these coaching sessions. Staying connected with people and friends who get me. If I, again, maybe I'm in a moment where I'm about to dive down in that amygdala hijack black hole, I may reach out to a friend just to help me work through it. And the other thing is we tend to not ask for help. A lot of us with ADHD, we're helpful. I mean, we'll give you the shirt off our back, but we don't necessarily ask for help. Next slide, please. So I want to end with this quote by Albert Einstein, who actually is suspected to have also had ADHD. Everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid. I think that was my last slide, was it? I think the resources, yeah. So, yeah, I'm standing here, you know, very vulnerable today. I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the solutions. But what I have found is acceptance. And I hope that you will find that as well if you haven't already. And these are like some of my resources, but again, I'm happy to have cards here as well, so you can reach out. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.